And it's the extreme of polite and the extreme of sudden action that is
You have
so
both
scary.
been so great this afternoon. Caroline Daly, Ben Thomas, thank you so much. Wallace, I travelled to Led Zeppelin concert. One of our crew was the one and only Danny Watson. Ask Danny about it. I might try to. Thank you. I'm Wallace Chapman. Back tomorrow.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Our Haere nei, the 6-minute trip to Kmart that led to an almost 8-hour wait on the phone to Healthline. And still there's mixed messages and confusion as COVID case contacts are renamed. It's also been revealed a real estate agent and several others visited the house of an infected family that was supposed to be self-isolating. The Associate Health Minister is live. Where's the oxygen mask? Air New Zealand burns through $1 billion in cash reserves. The supermarket worker with Down syndrome who helped change the KiwiSaver rules. Prime Minister, show us the mental health money, says a rural GP. And the so-called wokester cop versus the hot under the collar MP. Don't forget, you can catch us live on Facebook.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with DNA. Aucklanders turning up at testing centres are confused about some of the COVID-19 public health advice. More than 1,200 customers who visited the Botany Kmart on Friday the 19th and Saturday the 20th of February are now considered close contacts after the identification category was changed. They have been asked to self-isolate and get a test, but questions are mounting from shoppers on Sunday the 21st and people who used the click and collect service. RNZ spoke to this woman at the Botany Testing Centre today.
I was in Kmart on the 19th of February.
So do you know what kind of contact you're now classified as?
Casual plus.
So you're actually a close contact now. They've changed it.
The ministry expects the number of people who visited the Kmart store to increase. Meanwhile, Botany Kmart has been forced to close early, only one day after reopening. A spokesperson from First Union says the store shut its door at around 4 o'clock this afternoon due to a lack of available staff. The Auditor-General will carry out an inquiry into emergency housing grants that paid out nearly $40 million for private rental properties in Auckland. The Ministry of Social Development provides grants to people for short-term housing if they can't find accommodation. Eva Corlett reports.
The money goes to an accommodation supplier, which has usually been motels. But between November 2017 and June 2020, the ministry also paid landlords and property managers $38 million for the use of private rentals, mostly in Auckland. The quality of the private rentals and the amount paid to landlords has come under media scrutiny. The inquiry will examine how the ministry decided to enter into arrangements with private landlords and how it assessed the quality of those rentals. Ko Eva Corlett, PNA.
Immigration bosses are making inquiries to ensure a Green MP's partner did not get special treatment when applying for a visitor visa. Ricardo Menendez-March flew to Mexico in December to care for his sick parents. He returned with his partner, who had recently been granted a 6-month visa. National is questioning the decision, saying the visa requires an applicant to be living with a New Zealander in a genuine and stable relationship. The head of Immigration New Zealand, Greg Patchell, told reporters he was not aware of the exact details of the case, but it did not cause him any alarm.
Well, not especially, because often all you ever hear is one piece of information. There's a whole series of things that need to be taken into account.
Is it something that you think you need to go back and have another look at?
I'll certainly ask the question, yeah.
Greg Patchell from Immigration New Zealand. The Police Commissioner Andrew Coster has welcomed the opposition's challenge after a fiery Justice Select Committee. Mr Coster had heated exchanges with National's Justice spokesperson Simon Bridges, who last week described him as a wokester who was soft on the gangs. The pair clashed over the measuring of gang numbers, policing with consent and police pursuits. Mr Coster says it was good to have robust debate, but he wouldn't comment on Mr Bridges' personal criticisms.
It's not my place to comment on the conduct of members. I'm going to focus on the issues. I'm not going to get into that conversation. I'm going to let my actions speak for themselves and the positive impact that we're having for communities.
Andrew Costa says he stands by the police's approach and says there is no trade-off when it comes to prosecuting serious crime. Meanwhile, 15 people have been arrested in northern Hawke's Bay in a police crackdown on gangs. It follows gang conflict in January when people were wounded when shots were fired. For the past 6 weeks, police have arrested members of the Mongrel Mob and Black Power and are promising to continue targeting gangs and people involved in organised crime. It's part of the recently announced Operation Tauwhiro, launched by the Police Commissioner to crack down on gangs around the country. It's 4 minutes past 5. The Black Caps have taken 6 wickets in the second T20 International against Australia at University Oval in Dunedin. The New Zealanders set a challenging target of 220 after losing the toss, with under pressure opener Martin Guptill belting 97 off 50 balls to anchor the innings. A short time ago, Australia were 113 for 6 after 13 overs. The mixed martial arts trainer Eugene Behrman says New Zealand's UFC fighters should be allowed to wear the silver fern. Behrman's City kickboxing gym fighters are contesting next week's UFC 259 event when Israel Adesanya, Kai Kara France and Carlos Alberg will all enter the octagon. But Behrman says the UFC was contacted by New Zealand Rugby and asked not to use the silver fern because it has been trademarked.
No one owns that symbol. Everybody who represents our country internationally earns the right, especially my guys, to represent their country and wear that symbol. It's a symbol of national pride and national importance.
Eugene Behrman. New Zealand golfer Lydia returns to competition in Florida tomorrow for her 8th season on the Lpga Tour. It's almost 3 years since the 23-year-old last won a tournament, but she finished 2020 in strong form with 9 top 20 finishes and didn't miss a cut. And in Super Rugby Aotearoa, the Blues will field a starting lineup including 7 All Blacks with 2 more on the bench for their season opener against the Hurricanes in Wellington tomorrow. That's the news.
Is there more golf in Tiger?
If he could come back, it would be monumental. As somebody wiser than me once said, he doesn't move the needle, he is the needle.
An attack on the police boss condemned.
I don't think it's useful to undermine a public servant who can't defend himself with puerile attacks, which is exactly what Simon Bridges' attack was.
And Wellington City Council lurches again.
Do you still want to be mayor?
It's a very challenging situation. It's about steering the ship with a crew that's not always on the same wavelength.
Turbulent times. Morning Report, weekdays from 6, on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel partly cloudy, isolated light showers. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa mostly fine, however cloud and a few showers tomorrow morning. For the remainder of the North Island except Wellington, fine spells and a possible light shower tonight. Mainly fine tomorrow but isolated afternoon showers from Waikato to Taranaki. Wellington, Marlborough, Nelson and Buller cloudy with occasional rain, clearing tonight. Morning drizzle tomorrow for Wellington and scattered afternoon and evening showers inland tomorrow from Buller and Marlborough, some possibly heavy. Westland and Fiordland cloudy periods, occasional rain gradually spreading south tomorrow. Canterbury, North Otago and Dunedin mostly cloudy with patchy drizzle, long fine spells tomorrow afternoon. Southland and the remainder of Otago becoming fine, however a few areas of morning cloud tomorrow. Chatham Islands, fine spells. RNZ National at 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora, this is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Tonight, the 6-minute trip to Kmart that led to more than 7 hours on hold to Healthline to find out what to do, and still there's confusion. There's no new COVID cases in the community today, but it's been revealed there was a house viewing at the home of the most recently infected family. A real estate agent and 3 others were at the private viewing on Saturday when the family was supposed to be self-isolating. Also, the Ministry of Health has changed how it's classifying contacts. Kmart Botany customers who were in store at the same time as an infected teenager was working there on the 19th and 20th of February have gone from casual plus contacts to close contacts. There's also a new category for some store staff who've got a new label, close plus contacts. Confused? Well, you're not alone. Aucklander Lisa Marie nipped into Kmart Botany on Saturday 20th, right in the hot zone. It was a short trip with some pretty lengthy consequences.
It's kind of a regret. I could easily say now it was my fastest, least costliest trip to Kmart I've ever done, and it ended up costing me 2 weeks. What it actually was that my daughter had just purchased a new phone, and I said there was no way that she was not going to have that phone without a cover. So that night, Sunday evening, 8:57 to be precise, we scanned into Kmart, went straight to the phone section. She picked a cover straight away. We walked to the checkout. We then tapped and go. So we, credit card tap and go, picked up the phone case and walked out. And our till receipt said 9:03. So we were actually in there for 6 minutes.
I understand you tried to call Healthline. Tell me how that went.
I wanted to do the best and I wanted to do the right thing. So after putting a few of my younger children to bed that night, they were all a little bit stressed and on end, of course, because they just instantly had thought that I'd be taken away. So one of my youngest daughter was really concerned. She says, "Mum, are they going to actually take you away from us?" And I said, "Look, it's nothing like that whatsoever." I said, "We just need to find out exactly what's happening." So we got them off to bed, and I thought 10 to 10 at night was probably a really good time to call Healthline and find out just the position that we're in. Did my other 3 children need to go to school, and could my husband still go to work? So I wanted to just make sure that, I knew everything, because I'm normally one that likes to be in control. So I just wanted to know how my household was going to work. And, got on the line at 10 to 10. I was told I was behind 603 callers, which instantly I thought, oh, okay, I could be on here for a while. They did say roughly around 125 minutes. So the 603 I was very apprehensive about, but then when it said 125 minutes, I thought, hey, let's just do this. I got busy, of course, as every parent does, and folded washing and just potted around and did a lot of things, and then started to get a bit nervous thinking, okay, no one's answering or anything. And I'm not a nutter or a crazy woman to sit online or on a phone call for so long, but I needed to know what was happening with my children. I needed to know that, am I going to keep them all here? Is my husband not going to go to work tomorrow? I needed to know those things. So they did eventually answer the phone, but that was at roughly around 20 to 6 in the morning.
In the morning.
So,
sorry, am I hearing this right, Lisa Marie? So you were in essence, on the phone for 7 and a bit hours?
Yeah,
waiting.
Yeah. I actually had screenshotted it when I had just been answered, and it was 7:44. So
7 hours, 44 minutes.
Yeah.
And so did you just have a bit of a doze, as you say? You busied yourself around the house, had a bit of a doze, kept the phone there with the line on hold?
Kind of hard to doze, to be honest, because it was a good system. It was good and good enough to say, you are now such and such in queue, roughly looking at these minutes. But as I went down to probably behind 500 calls, I was still sitting at, I think, might have been roughly 112 minutes, and I thought there's something quite wrong there with those statistics. Yeah,
given the number of people that were in that store, would you have expected that they may have beefed up operators in order to deal with questions like the ones that you had?
Oh, without a doubt. I was, to be honest, I was actually quite surprised there wasn't a separate line for COVID. Is it our New Zealand Healthline? I don't know if everyone and anyone can, obviously, is it just the one line for New Zealand? I don't know. When I actually did speak to the operator, I just said, gosh, you must be busy. I said, how many people are actually fielding these calls? And she had actually said single digits. And I said, I beg your pardon? Single? And she said it would be single digits. And I thought, seriously, so there's this amount of calls coming through, there's been it's been publicly out there, and so many people would have gone through Kmart. I didn't know how many people had at that stage, and I just thought that sounds really odd.
So how clear has the message been from the Ministry of Health about what's expected from you and how you are classified as a contact? Because what is your classification, Lisa Marie?
Yeah, I am a casual plus, apparently. And
are you?
So, 6 minutes, not seeing anyone, not talking to anyone. Yeah, apparently so. I did read in the paper today it could be casual. I don't know. But I think
you
that's
actually
just
are
people to do when
you're actually now classified as a close contact. If you look at the updated definitions, you are now classified as a close contact.
But a close contact means that everyone in my household should be isolating. Is that not right? Because that's the way I would portray it.
Only if you have symptoms. So,
oh, right. Okay, yes.
So that takes us back to the original question, Lisa Marie. Are you clear on where you stand?
No. I could very easily say no to that.
And it is 15 minutes after 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Now, on the line is the Associate Health Minister, Aisha Verrall, and she joins me now. Minister, 7-hour wait to get through to the Healthline, confusion over contact status. Is that good enough?
No, it's not. And let me say that I'd really appreciate details of the call times of the woman you just spoke to, who I'm sorry I joined in during the interview later, so I didn't hear her name. But we really do need to follow up on that to make sure that doesn't happen again. And we will. The important thing is to know that we have put extra resource already through to Healthline, but we'll make sure we follow up specifically on what's happened here.
How clear are you being with your messages in the sense that there's been some renaming of contacts in their classification, and there does seem to be a bit of confusion out there? Are you on top of the message?
Yeah, so I think the key thing is to make sure that you discuss your situation with someone on Healthline if you have been at one of the locations of interest, and to get those instructions correct. It's not just a matter of knowing what to do, but also if you are a close contact, that gets you into the close contact tracing data system. And so it is important that the key message actually is to reach out either through Healthline or to find instructions from the Ministry of Health website.
I want to give you an example. This is from the official COVID Facebook page, right, where you can seek advice. You can chat with people on there. A person who was given advice, this is a Kmart shopper, who said they'd been in store on the 21st of February. So that's 21st. A day... Yeah, 21st. So a day after the worker was in there, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Now, they were told, and we've got screen captures of this conversation, they were told they were a close contact and to isolate for 14 days and to wash the items that they had purchased. That's not right, is it?
So that isn't correct. You're right, and thank you for drawing that to our attention, because on the 20th, the dates of interest for Kmart are the 19th and the 20th.
But how can we trust the advice being given? Because this is someone, presumably, who is officially working on the COVID Facebook page, handing out advice, yet they do not seem to be clear on the advice either. How can we trust it?
Yeah, that's a very good point, and we do take care to make sure the right advice is given, and you've clearly identified an instance we need to follow up on and to check if there's anything we can do to make sure that what I imagine must be a transcription or a reading error when that person read the date incorrectly is fixed.
Okay, so what has changed exactly? Why are these people being treated in a different way to how contacts of their nature were treated previously? For example, others who were exposed to the same cluster, people who went to Bunnings, Skechers and Subway, haven't been treated in the same way. So why has there been a change?
One of the... we are trying to take an extremely cautious approach to this case. in particular to these string of cases because of the new variant, and that is why we are using the casual plus approach. Another thing is just overall that approach of tracing the contacts of contacts has been one we've been bringing in for a little bit longer, and some people are referring that to as a close contact plus, but essentially the purpose of that is to make sure that we take every opportunity to get ahead of trains of transmission, so isolate, so to make sure that you cast a wider net when you do a contact trace.
Minister, you would have had a look at the Pullman report, right? And it raises some pretty significant concerns around airborne transmission. At point 13, it says airborne transmission may be associated with long-range transmission. This did not initially appear to be the case, but emerging evidence indicates that airborne transmission over distance is possible. Goes on to say this represents a challenging shift in paradigm of our understanding of disease transmission and infection prevention. Are we now dealing with a situation where we've been told stay 1 to 2 metres away, but are you now learning that actually it can travel much further, so that advice needs to be updated? So the evidence for airborne transmission appears to be in particular high-risk settings which are particularly closed spaces. And so for MIQ, that means making sure that areas like the lifts and the corridors are properly ventilated, and we've taken steps to do that. Whereas, for example, social distancing in an outdoor space, I think the 2 metre recommendation for that would still be considered appropriate. The airborne transmission does happen. We have seen that evidence come through, but it is not the case that it throws the majority of transmission is certainly droplet and certainly within a shorter radius. Is there any new test results that you can share with us regarding the most recent cluster? Are there any positives? Well, the good news is that there haven't been any new positives in association with the cluster today. There is a new location of interest in essence, which is if we can call it the Kmart family's home. There appears to have been a house viewing there. What is the situation? So there was a house viewing there before the case was diagnosed, and there were 4 contacts resulting from that house viewing. They are all in isolation. They have not yet reached the time when they would have had their first test result back yet. But the house visit took place at a time, regardless, that family were supposed to be self-isolating, correct? Yes, that's right. Thank you for your time this evening. That is the Associate Health Minister, Dr. Aisha Verrill. We're keen for your feedback on that. Have you had to isolate? What do you think about the information you've received? Is it clear? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A Waikato doctor wants to know where promised funding for mental health has gone after being pledged by the Prime Minister in his surgery. Jacinda Ardern visited the Matamata Medical Centre in 2019, in part to discuss new funding for primary mental health care. But the local GP says there's still no sign of the money. Nick Trubridge has the story.
It was mid-2019 when Matamata Medical Centre got the call, but it wasn't a patient requesting an appointment, it was the Prime Minister's office. Jacinda Ardern was due in Waikato for field days and, while there, wanted to visit the hard-working staff behind the medical centre that had just won Best Rural Practice.
The Prime Minister's message was that she would like to come and visit and see the practice and have a chat to the general practitioners and staff about a mental health proposal.
That's Matamata Medical Centre's Dr Greg Dunn. He's worked as a rural GP for decades. The New Zealand Doctor magazine covered Ardern's visit to the medical centre, which is not far from her hometown of Morrinsville. Tea, scones and issues were all on the agenda, NZ Doctor reported. But then came a promise from the Prime Minister.
It was really telling us about a proposed mental health funding for primary health care that the government was putting in place, and asking us our sort of experience of dealing with mental health conditions in the community.
Ardern reportedly told Matamata Medical Centre of $455 million for a frontline mental health service. It was on the back of that news that Matamata Medical Centre's directors decided to hire a nurse for mental health support. Dr Dunn says the practice had been led to believe extra mental health funding was on the way.
But as the months rolled by, we didn't hear of any extra funding, but we just continued to employ the nurse because we saw the benefit of her role in the practice. And to my knowledge, the funding has not eventuated into primary care. So that's pretty much where it's at.
There are limited opportunities to refer people onto counsellors in the mental health space because of costs and limited resources, Dr Dunn says. Other practices found in-house mental health support meant doctors could literally send patients down the hall for extra support. But in the end, this was a cost the Matamata Medical Centre had to bear itself.
She was with us for well over 12 months, but we haven't found anyone else in that specific role, but we did carry those costs of her employment.
Checkpoint approached the Prime Minister's office for a response. We wanted to know if she knew why funding hadn't made it to primary care providers like Matamata Medical. Health Minister Andrew Little responded instead, saying the $455 million investment is to expand access to and choice of primary mental health and addiction services. Funding for these services has been given to the Waikato Collaborative, made up of the DHB, primary health organisations and non-governmental organisations. It's the Collaborative's job to distribute that funding in the Waikato, Little says. In the meantime, though, Dr Dunn says the mental health sector remains under a huge amount of pressure in terms of capacity and finding enough trained professionals. He sees large numbers of patients present with mental health difficulties.
In my work, I would certainly see a goodly number of people with mental health disorders in a normal day.
So multiple a day, is that what you mean?
Very much so, yeah.
Meanwhile, Checkpoint has received dozens of messages from people around the country fed up with mental health services following our story on staff burnout and massive wait times at Auckland DHB's Kāri Centre. One concerned parent whose comments we've voiced told us the wait time to access child and adolescent mental health services in Taranaki is 12 months.
It seems crazy that this is the place we're supposed to go for help, and it's so inaccessible.
A Taranaki DHB spokeswoman said there is no wait for acute child and adolescent mental health services, but it did have unfilled roles within those psychology services, which meant longer wait times for patients who are not acute. Meanwhile, a mental health worker in Invercargill described the Southern DHB's mental health services as inadequate and in a critical condition. We've voiced her comments to protect her identity.
What concerns me is it's most likely to hit the youth, and we've got an astounding youth suicide rate.
Checkpoint has approached the Southern District Health Board for a response, but we are yet to receive any answers. For Checkpoint, Nick Trowbridge.
Could you use your Air New Zealand credits or air points to buy a slice of the national carrier in the not-too-distant future? Air New Zealand's COVID-clipped wings has seen it burn through $1 billion in cash reserves, with the company today announcing a loss of $185 million for the second half of 2020. It's got just over $170 million of its own cash reserves and $550 million of the government's $900 million loan facility left. And it's working on a plan to raise equity mid-year while maintaining the government's majority shareholding. I asked Air New Zealand boss Greg Foran, with borders essentially closed, how long can the airline last without more help from the government?
Oh, that's a good question, Lisa. And the answer to that is I'm pretty confident we're going to get some support from the government. So we've been working actively with them and making lots of good progress there. And, the time is actually working in our favour because we know more and more about COVID as this rolls through. And we'll get this together and get in front of Cabinet, and they'll make the final decision, and we'll get ourselves a new capital structure by 30 June. So I'm confident we're going to get there, and we're making good progress.
Without that, Greg, how long would this airline have?
Well, if you do the maths and you say that you're burning between $45 and $55 million worth of cash at the moment, which we've shared, and we've already gone through $350 million. So there's $550 million left. Assume that we've had the benefit of some tailwinds with things like wage subsidy and navigation charges and holiday with PAYE, which we have to start paying back soon. Look, you'll get through for quite a few more months, but it doesn't go on forever.
About 15 more months on a Ralph calculation, isn't it?
Well, some of those things would depend on what would happen. We would assume that at some point we will get that operation going across the Tasman, and so that gives you a bit of revenue. And at the same time, you get something going in the Pacific Islands. Further afield might take longer. So all of these things are a depends, but as I said right at the beginning, we're making good progress. Obviously a cabinet decision, but let's assume that we get that done, and 30th of June we have a new capital structure in place.
Okay, about that capital structure, the government is clear that it wants to remain the majority shareholder of Air New Zealand. So how will that work?
Well, we'll have to decide how much capital that we require in the business with them, and that will be a combination of equity and debt. In terms of whatever the amount is of equity that we require for them to maintain their ownership of 52%, then they'd be looking to take up 52% of that equity offer.
Right, so are you going to convert the money that you have used from that loan into equity rather than pay it back?
Well, this is a transaction which we're still working through, and I don't want to comment on a transaction that hasn't been completed, Lisa. So let's get ourselves to a position where that transaction's completed, and then we can share the details.
But that's still on the table, converting that to equity?
As I said, we're working through all of that, and let's complete that transaction and see where we end up.
How far would a trans-Tasman bubble go to solving your problems?
It helps. Doesn't solve it all.
How much would it help?
Well, if you think about Air New Zealand pre-COVID, we were doing sort of a third of our business domestically and about a third of our business across the Tasman and the Pacific Islands and a third of the business long haul. So if we could get the Tasman back up and running, and if Pacific Islands were running at the same time, and it was a reasonably stable market, in other words, there wasn't significant price discounting because there was lots of capacity thrown at it, then it would go a reasonably long way to assisting us based on the costs we've taken out of the business so far.
In your view, should it be happening right now? Because Australia, I know the flights are on hold right at this second, but Australia has been accepting New Zealanders in on flights, quarantine-free, for a number of months now. In your view, should we be offering a reciprocal arrangement right now?
It's a question that I'm going to avoid because at the end of the day, it actually doesn't really matter what my view is on this, Lisa. And the governments are deciding when the borders will open and how they will operate. And Air New Zealand operates in accordance with what those regulations are. And at this stage, we don't have that ability to do two-way like Australia does. But having said that, Australia has closed that two-way on us twice in the last few weeks.
Okay, here's the thing. You won't give us a time frame, yet you must be working towards some kind of forecast that you have for when trans-Tasman flights will happen. You're bringing on more staff. So what time frame are you planning toward?
Well, we actually look at this, Lisa, by running multiple scenarios. And we create.
So what's your best case scenario, Greg? Give us your best case scenario for the trans-Tasman bubble.
The very best case scenario we ran, Lisa, was one that said we would actually be open by now.
Okay, give me your second best case scenario then.
And that was one that we pulled together in December, and we were feeling pretty good about that.
Okay, in all seriousness, Greg, what's your second best case scenario then?
Oh, look, I think that probably had us opening around July, but Lisa, I'm not going to go through all 10.
No. Have you got 10?
Understand we do have 10. And we look at those, and rather than just running one, we think it's prudent so that the homework is done. And when we, get more information, then we can pivot reasonably quickly.
Okay, you've given me your best case scenario. You say there's 10 scenarios. How far off is the worst case scenario, please?
Oh, that's well into the future, and I'm pretty confident we're not going to get there. But
Give me a year. Give me a year, please.
It's good, prudent business planning that you understand what the bookend is.
And so what is it? The worst case scenario bookend. What is the year?
I can't recall off the top of my head, Lisa, but it's a fair way out.
Okay. Hey, you have extended the period of time where people can spend their credits, right? What are the value of the credits that you're still holding?
Look, that's not a number that we put out there. What I can tell you is that customers that use at the moment are representing, in terms of our revenue, about 20% of that revenue is them using their credits. I think that once we get flying internationally, I think people will start to use those credits more actively, but we don't share that number publicly.
What about air points? How many of those are on the books?
Quite a few, and people have been pretty active using those air points, and I think it's a terrific program. Obviously, they're getting some air points flying domestically, nothing like they would if we were flying international. But what we are seeing is a good use of air points with our ground partners.
Can you guarantee customers that those air points will be good? You're not going to take them away at any point?
For sure. Look, a loyalty program in an airline is just so critical, and that's an area that we continue to see as an opportunity for Air New Zealand, and we've been building plans around that, and we think we can make it even better. So what we will do is really see how we can get customers excited about our Air Points program.
Here's a radical idea. Are you going to let people use their credits or Air Points to buy shares in Air New Zealand?
That is a good question, and I'm going to use the answer I used before. We're working through the transaction at the moment, so let us do that, and we'll see where we get to.
So you're not ruling that out?
We're working through all kinds of options at the moment, and I'm not going to comment further on something which is still in play. So
it's still on the table, Greg?
As I said, Lisa, we consider all kinds of options, and we're just working through this very sensibly. And I honestly can't comment on a transaction that hasn't been completed.
And that is Air New Zealand boss Greg Foran. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, immigration bosses take a closer look at the visa given to a Green MP's partner. The supermarket worker with Down syndrome who helped change the KiwiSaver rules, and the close plus, close, casual plus and casual COVID classification confusion continues. We would love your feedback. Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time now for the headlines with Susanna.
Aucklanders are turning up at testing centres confused by some of the COVID-19 public health advice. The Ministry of Health has changed how it classifies coronavirus contacts, meaning that more than 1,200 customers who visited the Botany Kmart last Friday and Saturday are now considered close contacts in the Papatoetoe outbreak. Associate Health Minister Aisha Verrill has told Checkpoint the ministry has put more resources into Healthline and will look into any problems. The Auditor-General will carry out an inquiry into emergency housing grants that paid out nearly $40 million for private rental properties in Auckland. The quality of the private rentals and the amount paid to landlords has come under increased media scrutiny. The Police Commissioner, Andrew Coster, has welcomed what he calls robust debate after a fiery Justice Select Committee today. Mr Coster had heated exchanges with National Simon Bridges, who last week described him as a wokester who was soft on the gangs. Meanwhile, 15 people have been arrested in Northern Hawke's Bay in a gang crackdown for the past 6 weeks. Police have arrested members of the Mongrel Mob and Black Power and are promising to continue targeting gangs and people involved in organised crime. The man who led the review into the dysfunctional Tauranga City Council before it was taken over by Supplier Commissioner, has been appointed to lead the review into Wellington's council. Wellington Mayor Andy Foster says Peter Winder has a significant track record in governance, and he has every confidence the findings will be impartial. The scope of the review will be to observe governance practices, examine how decisions are made, and also look into media and social media coverage of the council. And in sport, the Black Caps have edged Australia by 4 runs to win their second T20 international at University Oval in Dunedin. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. And it's time now for the business news with Nicholas Poynton, who joins me in the studio. Nicholas, A2 goes from zero to hero.
Yeah, the stock market darling has reported a significant fall in its half-year profit. We already had wind that things weren't going to be looking too bright for this company. That was late last year when they significantly downgraded its profit forecast. The issue being that COVID-19 has really cut off revenue through the all-important Daigou channel. And that's when Chinese tourists and students, both in New Zealand and in Australia, snap up lots of New Zealand products and they on-sell them back to friends and family back home. It doesn't sound like much, but it contributes a lot to the company's bottom line. Also, not just this company, but also the honey exporter Comvita as well. But with borders closed, that sales channel has effectively been turned off. The result being that its revenue fell by 16% over the period. That's sort of in line with profit forecast that they gave us. But that's flowed on to, its half-year profit down by about 35% from 185 million to 120 million. Now, there's been some sort of moves to offset these falls with strong growth in its Chinese produced and labelled products, and it's now looking to really sort of drive further growth within this market. But you've just got to remember that, Chinese infant formula, there was that huge scandal years ago now, probably about 13 years back, when infant formula had been adulterated with melamine, and you had I think it was the number, about 6 infants died over that whole scandal. The flow-on effect is that those scars still linger today. That's why there's such a huge demand and a premium that's placed in overseas products. So you can see why this is this company's main priority at the moment. It's reactivating this channel, because in the short term it expects to run at a small loss before it returns to being back in the black. And I know we'll get to the market numbers soon, but on the back of this announcement, A2's shares fell by as much as 17%. And since August last year, when its shares reached its high, they're down by more than half to $9.34.
Okay, well, business confidence going sideways, you say?
Yeah, not all good news today, I'm afraid. Signs emerging from ANZ Bank's its latest measure of sort of business confidence, that sentiment shows that maybe the economy is going to be not necessarily grow that much this year. If it does, it'll be very slow. It's worth noting that the bank's economist says the data for the past month, there are signs that it was maybe influenced by that snap lockdown, but taking a broad look at them, it's largely consistent with its view that the economy or growth will largely be sideways this year. It suggests that the huge overshoot that we've seen coming out of the lockdown last year, there are signs emerging now that that's beginning to lose momentum, because measures like firms' cost expectations, they're up. Firms' view of what the next 12 months are going to look like, they're largely flat. Profit expectations down, export intentions down, and interestingly, and this is one people should probably pay attention to, is that inflation and price intentions are up. All those supply chain difficulties that we've been hearing about for months now, those costs, well, businesses are now looking to pass them on to consumers. So I guess the warning there is that do not be too surprised in the coming months when the goods you're buying, the prices do look a little bit higher. But these inflation costs, they can impact actually economic growth. I've done some reporting earlier this year about the construction sector, which is really struggling to get its hands on key suppliers. And the construction sector, it really is the straw that is stirring the drink in the economy at the moment. But, these supplier issues, we're seeing delays with projects, blown budgets. The effects can actually slow down actual growth and actual money that's moving around the economy. So that's one to really keep an eye on in the coming months.
Okay, and shall we do a quick trot around the market numbers today?
Yeah, the NZX is down 142 points. A lot of that is tied to A2 milk. It is a big player on our stock market. So it's down by about 1.2% to 12,140. And Air New Zealand, who we heard from Greg Foran before, its share price on the back of today's announcement is actually up 1.27% to $1.59. Our dollar is at 74.2 US cents, 93.3 Australian, and Bitcoin it's down to about 67,000 New Zealand dollars. So a little bit within range.
Only 67,000 New Zealand dollars. Fantastic. Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with Business News there. The so-called Wokester Police Commissioner has gone head-to-head with National MP Simon Bridges. The pair clashed in several heated exchanges in a select committee today over the police's approach to gangs. Political reporter Yvette McCullough has more.
Simon Bridges set the tone, jumping in early to challenge the man he calls a wokester. The National MP zeroing in on Andrew Costa over his assertion it's difficult to accurately measure the rise in gang members.
Gang numbers in New Zealand, it's inarguable, are increasing incredibly significantly.
So
do you accept that?
We've launched this operation.
No, do you accept that?
We've launched this operation because we are concerned about gang activity.
And I just want to know if you accept the gang numbers.
Your question?
Well, that wasn't my question.
We have no confidence about the total number of active gang members.
But Mr Bridges really went on the attack when he asked this singer.
Commissioner, do police still arrest criminals in New Zealand?
Mr Bridges took aim at the policy of policing by consent. And while he didn't call him a wokester to his face, Mr Bridges said he felt Mr Costa had tipped the balance too far in the wrong direction.
What does policing by consent mean when Mongols take over a road and are there? Because it seems to me, I'm just trying to be straight with you, what it actually means is you don't show up.
But Mr Costa stood his ground.
When we look overseas and we see the violent clashes that have occurred between police and ordinary citizens over COVID lockdowns, over issues like Black Lives Matter, that's what it looks like when the police lose the consent of their community. As I have said to you, we have put more pressure on gangs, taken more assets, taken more guns in the last year than we have at any time in our history.
Mr Bridges accused the Commissioner of tailoring his message today because he'd seen his public criticism.
I've now had interchanges with you twice, Commissioner, in committees. I've found that you're very capable of being firm with members. I just asked you that you're that firm with gang members.
We are as firm as we have ever been with gangs, and that is evidenced by the prosecutions we've undertaken, outstripping what we have done in the past.
Problem is, I don't think any New Zealander believes that, Commissioner.
Speaking to reporters afterwards, Mr Costa said he welcomed the robust debate.
It's not my place to comment on the conduct of members. I'm going to focus on the issues. I'm not going to get into that conversation. I'm going to let my actions speak for themselves and the positive impact that we're having for communities.
Mr Bridges defended his criticism of a public servant, saying that Parliament needs straight shooters.
And when it comes to public safety and a very woke, nuanced approach to crime, I feel that actually New Zealand needs some hard questions and some honest talk.
Former Police Minister Stuart Nash says Mr Costa is an exceptional man and leader, and he has a theory on why Mr Bridges is lashing out.
I think it's unbelievable. I think this is probably Simon's play for leadership, if I'm honest about this.
Mr Bridges denied that he had been reprimanded by Judith Collins over the saga or asked not to repeat the word woke.
I've great respect for the leader of the National Party, but I only get tellings off from one person, and that's my wife.
From Parliament for Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
And it is 14 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. After 6 tonight, more on the COVID contact reclassification confusion. People with life-shortening conditions will soon get to access their KiwiSaver earlier. The government's announced that from next month, people with Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, Huntington's disease and fetal alcohol spectrum disorder can access their funds before turning 65. The change potentially benefits thousands of people and comes after one man and his mum took their fight for justice all the way to Parliament. Ruth Hill reports.
Auckland supermarket worker Tim Fairhall joined KiwiSaver on the advice of his mother Joan. She says it seemed to be an absolute no-brainer.
So I said, yeah, go for it. And didn't consider, as perhaps I should have known, that he would not be able to get it out on his retirement, and I knew that his retirement would have to be a lot earlier than 65.
That's because Tim, who's 41, has Down syndrome, which has a life expectancy of about 60. The Fairhalls felt it wasn't fair he might not live long enough to enjoy his savings. So in 2019, they convinced Parliament to give early access to KiwiSaver for people like him with life-shortening conditions. Today, the government announced changes to make that even easier, with a list of 4 congenital conditions which will guarantee early withdrawal. Speaking at the official announcement at IHC's Wellington headquarters this morning, Tim Fairhall shared his plans for his KiwiSaver savings.
I want to use my savings to see my brother Scott from Italy and see my friend Thomas in Canada. I'm very excited. My friends and family are really important to me.
He says he's grateful the government listened, showing his appreciation by sharing his colouring book with the Minister of Commerce and Consumer Affairs, David Clark.
It is a big journey for me, and I enjoyed it.
What was that work like for you? Was it really hard?
No, a little bit, but I got my mum on my side. She's my best friend.
Joan Fairhall is delighted her son will get to enjoy his hard-earned savings, along with thousands of other people who are missing out on their own money.
People with a disability too have dreams and things that they're going to want in their retirement. They're also going to want a retirement. So they're certainly entitled to it, and I'm very glad that we've been able to help.
David Clark, who was visibly moved, paid tribute to Tim and Joan Fairhall for their advocacy.
Here we've had somebody who's reached out, written a letter, and a law change has come about that is going to make the system fairer for New Zealanders. This is the kind of thing that is really touching as a minister, when you get to play a small part in a journey of making the world a fairer and better place.
David Clark says the list of 4 conditions, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, Huntington's disease and fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, was developed in consultation with health and disability experts from IHC, Massey University and the New Zealand Medical Association. They're likely to account for most applications, but others born with life-shortening congenital conditions can also apply with the support of their doctors. The head of the Medical Association, Leslie Clark, says the implications for equity go far beyond just KiwiSaver.
Every health policy, every health service that has an age requirement on it, this needs to be examined to see whether that is appropriate for those groups who may be in a different situation because of ethnicity or other reasons and need access to those services earlier.
David Clark says widening early access to KiwiSaver for other reasons, like ethnicity, isn't on the table at the moment. But he says the new regime will be reviewed in 18 months and then periodically after that. For Checkpoint, Ruth Hill.
Immigration bosses are looking into the case of a Green MP's partner to ensure no special treatment was given regarding his visa application. Ricardo Menendez-March flew to Mexico in December to care for his sick parents and returned with his partner, who had recently been granted a 6-month visa. National MPs today questioned Immigration New Zealand over the decision, but the Greens are confident everything is above board. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Since the borders slammed shut last year, many couples have found themselves separated, struggling to bring their partner into the country, with application after application declined.
One New Zealand doctor went to live in Israel for 6 months, working at a hospital, was only domiciled there, nowhere else, with his partner for 6 months, hasn't been able to bring her back.
National's Erica Stanford came armed with such stories to confront immigration's top brass at Parliament this morning, and with one purpose: to find out why, despite such strict settings, a visa was freely granted to the partner of Green MP Ricardo Menendez-March.
So there was no special treatment given, there was no surprises, it was just a run-of-the-mill, it met the instructions. That's
I think we're looking a bit confused about it because we're not familiar with it.
Carolyn Tremaine is the Chief Executive at the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. Greg Patchell is the Head of Immigration. They were not across the details of the case, but confirmed that such a visa would typically require an applicant to be living together with a New Zealander. And it is a high bar. The rules make clear that sharing accommodation during holidays does not qualify.
If a couple were domiciled in 2 houses, in 2 countries, and they simply stayed with each other on holiday every now and then, Would that not then meet the living together instruction?
In the situation that you described, that probably wouldn't meet the criteria.
And that's what's piqued National's concern. They want to know why Mr Menendez-March's partner was given the go-ahead. For his part, the Green MP says they followed all the correct processes. Everything was above board. He and his partner delivered a package of information to prove they met the criteria of a genuine and stable relationship. His partner was invited to apply on December the 3rd. On January the 11th, a 6-month visa was granted.
It's a really, really scrutinising and thorough process that you're put through, which includes quite intimate information.
That includes details about their living arrangements. Mr Menendez-March says they were able to prove they had lived together prior to the pandemic in Mexico.
We lived together for several months, and obviously enough for Immigration New Zealand as well to be satisfied. It's an incredibly rigorous process.
The head of immigration, Greg Patchell, says he will do some further research into the specific case, but on the face of it, he's not concerned.
Not especially, because often all you ever hear is one piece of information. There's a whole series of things that need to be taken into account.
Is it something that you think you need to go back and have another look at?
I'll certainly ask the question, yeah.
And that means, for now, the story is unlikely to go away. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
Former Wellington mayors are throwing their 2 cents worth in over the shambolic goings-on at the City Council. There are also questions being raised about whether Mayor Andy Foster even has the authority to trigger the review he's commissioning. And for the second time in just days, the Auditor-General has been asked to run the ruler over some of Mr Foster's decisions. Hamish Cardwell filed this report.
It's been another difficult day for the beleaguered Wellington Mayor Andy Foster. After announcing an independent review into council division and disagreement yesterday, today Wellington Councillor Jill Day wrote to the Mayor saying he does not have the power to do that. It has to go through an all-of-council committee, she says. Some of the capital's former leaders are also having their say. Former Porirua Mayor and Wellington mayoral candidate Nick Leggett says there is a failure of leadership and systemic problems at the council. He says Mr Foster is right to try and fix the problems, but he's gone about it the wrong way.
There are no details about it. I think he should have fully fleshed that out. My understanding is that no staff of the council were aware of what he was planning, so he had no advice, and then he chose to tell only half the council. This is a really good example of the problem that Andy's leadership faces. Not communicating, not being clear, not understanding what it is he wants to deliver.
On the streets of Wellington, some doubted whether the review is a good use of taxpayers' coin.
No, I don't think it's a good use of people's money. These guys should be capable of doing that themselves. That's what we pay them to do. I don't expect them to call in a consultancy company to figure out what the hell's wrong with them.
It's always a good idea to review your policies and processes and things like that.
If something's not working, they need to, any normal business looks at it, gets an independent person in to review it, and then comes up with a solution.
Former 3-term Wellington Mayor Dame Kerry Prendergast says it took great courage for Mr Foster to instigate the review. She says it's time to shed light on what's going on, and says the public's perception that the council is in disarray matters.
It's not a good look, and I imagine that there is a risk of us losing good staff at the City Council, and of course businesses choosing not to relocate here because of the risk around both the infrastructure and the leadership.
Porirua Mayor Anita Baker says to get the council working together, Mr Foster needs to make the time to communicate with all the councillors.
So for me, my councillor is the most important thing at my table, so I meet with him once a week, and I know he's got a bigger councillor than me, but it's about making time for your councillors individually and then as groups. Today we've got a mix of councillors at lunch, there's a couple of people who have gone off, but we make the effort, and I have them over for a meal once a year, we have a get-together at my place, and it's about actually making a team.
Anita Baker says the Wellington Council needs to stop wasting time with infighting that is desperately needed to be spent tackling the massive issues facing the region.
We need their council to all be getting on and moving forward in the region, because if Wellington's not doing well, the rest of us aren't, because we actually are one region.
Mayor Andy Foster says the local government minister has, for now, ruled out appointing a Crown Commissioner. Meanwhile, the Wellington Chinese Garden Society has asked the Auditor-General to look into last-minute changes Mr Foster made to the council's long-term plan that could see funding stripped from a waterfront garden project. Over the weekend, Councillor Fleur Fitzsimons also wrote to the watchdog asking for an investigation into the Mayor's 11th hour changes. For Checkpoint, iti whanganui atara, ko Hamish Cardwell ho.
Japan's newly appointed Olympics chief says Tokyo is pushing ahead with plans for the Summer Games this July. Seiko Hashimoto believes the Olympics can be held safely, despite the COVID pandemic and a lack of vaccinations. But the public disagrees. The BBC's Rupert Wingfield-Hayes reports.
This is the sound of the special COVID ward at the St Mariana Hospital just south of Tokyo. The last time I was here nearly 10 months ago, Japan was in the midst of its first wave of the COVID virus. Since then, the size of this unit has doubled, and they've been through 2 more waves of the virus, the third and largest in late January. The head of the unit is Dr. Fujitani.
Months ago, when the coronavirus and the patient is really peak, all the bed was full, and we cannot accept any patient because there are no beds at the time. We cannot accept even the other populations like a heart attack. So we're really very in a tough time.
Japan's hospitals are under huge strain, but one thing that has protected them and kept Japan's COVID deaths relatively low has been closed borders. There's been virtually no international travel to Japan since last April. Despite that, the spokesman for the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Committee, Masa Takaya, says it is now full steam ahead for the opening of the delayed Olympics on July the 23rd.
We have been able to gain a massive expertise against this global pandemic compared to what we had last year. Today, we have absolutely in a better position.
The Olympic Committee still has some persuading to do, because despite what Masa Takaya says, Japanese people remain unconvinced.
COVID is far from over, and preparation to stop infection is not complete.
I don't think it's possible to hold Olympics this year. We don't know when the pandemic will end.
Now, it's time for a bit of your feedback. Someone has got in touch to say, love your work, Checkpoint, but can't understand why you can't manage graphics for the weather. Budget constraints, but we could work on that. Maybe I could do some performance art in a 2-shot with Susanna as she reads the graphic. You know, round arms for the sun, floating fingers for the rain. I don't know what we'd do for a tornado, maybe a bit of whipping arms. Stand by for those.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata with DNA. A Kmart shopper who waited nearly 8 hours to speak to Healthline is surprised about how few people were taking the calls. Lisa Marie visited the Botany store on Saturday night in the same time frame as the confirmed COVID case was there. She immediately isolated but wanted advice on what the rest of her household should do. But she says it took nearly 8 hours until someone answered on the hotline.
I just said, gosh, you must be busy. I said, how many people are actually fielding these calls? And she had actually said single digits.
Meanwhile, the number of Aucklanders considered close contacts of the COVID-19 cluster has increased after more than 1,200 Kmart Botany shoppers had their contact designation upgraded. Anyone who was at the store at the same time as the positive case is now being asked to isolate, get 2 tests, call Healthline, and if they develop symptoms, get their household members to isolate. Kmart staff have also been upgraded to the Close Plus category. Microbiologist Susie Wiles says the new categories are a good move, but there needs to be clear messaging.
We need to have really clear idea of what actions people need to take. And it is confusing because, it might depend on the setting, on what we know about the cases. I guess people should be getting in touch with the public health units if they have been exposed, who will be able to give them the correct advice.
Microbiologist Susie Wiles. And a family with 3 positive COVID-19 cases held a viewing at their home at the weekend. The Ministry of Health says a real estate agent and 3 others viewed the home on Saturday for about half an hour. They have all been contacted contacted by public health officials and are awaiting test results. There are no new cases in the community today and 3 new cases in managed isolation. The National Party is accusing the government of acting far too slowly in its response to the Reserve Bank's influence on the housing market. The government has told the Reserve Bank that it will have to take house prices into account when making decisions. One of National's finance spokespeople, Andrew Bailey, says he first proposed such a move last November.
I think it's absolutely unfortunate that we've had a minister who has just basically sat around for some months when it was quite clear there was a path to do this.
Andrew Bailey says the government now needs to focus on spending money on infrastructure that enables more houses to be built, rather than just talking about it. The Medical Association wants more people with shorter life expectancies to get earlier access to services. People with 4 congenital conditions, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, Huntington's disease and fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, will now be automatically entitled to withdraw from their fund earlier than the age of 65. The head of the Medical Association, Leslie Clark, says the implications for equity go far beyond just KiwiSaver.
Every health policy, every health service that has an age requirement on it, this needs to be examined to see whether that is appropriate for those groups who may be in a different situation because of ethnicity or other reasons and need access to those services earlier.
Leslie Clark says the Medical Association is pleased the policy will be reviewed in 18 months. For the second time in just days, the Auditor-General has been asked to look at Wellington Mayor Andy Foster's last-minute amendments to the city's long-term plan. The Wellington Chinese Garden Society has written to the watchdog about a proposal which would strip funding for a waterfront garden project. Last week, just 36 hours before the council was due to meet to make major 10-year decisions on the city's future, Mr Foster sent out an email to councillors with a series of amendments. Wellington Councillor Fleur Fitzsimons has written to the Auditor-General asking for an investigation into the Mayor's 11-hour changes. US President Joe Biden has revoked a series of Trump-era orders, including the pause on green card applications. Former President Donald Trump temporarily blocked people from seeking permanent residency in the US, arguing he was protecting American jobs. Jagruti Dave reports from Washington.
Directly contradicting his predecessor, Joe Biden said in a proclamation the green card's ban did not advance the interests of the United States, but harmed US interests because it separated families and harmed businesses. Donald Trump had said immigrants were a risk to the US labour market. The restrictions were in place until the end of March. Joe Biden also rescinded several other executive actions by Donald Trump, including an order promoting beautiful civic architecture for federal buildings and a memo labelling liberal cities like New York and Portland as anarchist jurisdictions.
Jagruti Dave with that report. It's 5 minutes past 6. The Black Caps all-rounder Jimmy Neesham has grabbed 2 wickets in the last over as New Zealand edged to a 4-run win over Australia in the second T20 International in Dunedin. The New Zealanders reached 219 for 7 after losing the toss at Dunedin Oval. Opener Martin Guptill anchored the innings with 97, while Neesham belted an unbeaten 45 off 16 balls. Mitchell Santner led the Black Caps bowling with figures of 4-4-31. New Zealand lead the 5-match series 2-0 with the third T20 in Wellington next Wednesday. The Breakers are bottom of the Australian National Basketball League table and take on the Sydney Kings tonight without 2 key players, Rob Lowe and Lamar Patterson. New Zealand Breakers coach Dan Shamir says he won't be working his team any harder and is relying on the players he's got to get them out of the hole they find themselves in. Shamir says the players will learn to win by playing games.
At the end of the day, I strongly believe that teams and players improve only via the competition. Although our record is very bad, we have a team that can play much better and that can win.
Breakers coach Dan Shamir. New Zealand golfer Lydia Ko returns to competition tomorrow for her 8th season of the Lpga Tour. Ko will play the Gainbridge tournament on her home course in Florida. It's almost 3 years since the 23-year-old last won a tournament, but she finished 2020 in strong form with 9 top 20 finishes and didn't miss a cut. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Eric Brenstrom joins us once again, keeping his eye on the world's weather. That'll be a weather eye. Eric's tracking the Texas snowstorm, 2020's record temperatures, tropical cyclone Yasa, and the state of La Nina, to name but a few. Then we're off to Taiwan and our overseas correspondent, William Yang in Taipei. That's Nights with me, Karen Hay, in for Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight. Tomorrow, Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, partly cloudy, isolated light showers. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa are mostly fine, however cloud and a few showers tomorrow morning. For the remainder of the North Island except Wellington, fine spells and a possible light shower today, mainly fine tomorrow, but isolated afternoon showers from Waikato to Taranaki. Wellington, Marlborough, Nelson and Bulla, cloudy with occasional rain, clearing tonight. Morning drizzle tomorrow for Wellington and scattered afternoon and evening showers inland tomorrow from Bulla and Marlborough. Some possibly heavy. Westland and Fiordland cloudy periods, occasional rain gradually spreading south tomorrow. Canterbury, North Otago and Dunedin mostly cloudy with patchy drizzle. Long fine spells tomorrow afternoon. Southland and the remainder of Otago becoming fine this evening. However, a few areas of morning cloud tomorrow. Chatham Islands, fine spells. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Close plus, close, casual plus and casual, the ever-widening net of contact categories in Auckland's COVID-19 response is stirring up confusion. As officials try to contain Auckland's community cluster, a larger proportion of the city is being asked to stay at home and get at least one test. Katie Todd reports.
An evening shopping trip has ground life to a halt for more than 1,200 shoppers. Anyone who visited Kmart in Botany last Friday or Saturday evening has been instructed to isolate for 2 weeks and get 2 COVID tests after one of the recent cases worked there. At first they were deemed casual plus contacts, but last night they got an upgrade to close. Now, if they start displaying symptoms, members of their household have to stay home too. And one tab of the Ministry of Health website suggests they get 3 tests. At the packed community testing centre in Botany today, people were heeding the calls to get a swab, but were largely unclear on the specifics.
Why are you guys getting a test?
Because I went to Kmart.
Do you now know what kind of contact you are?
Close contact, I think.
Because I was in Kmart on the 19th of February.
So do you know what kind of contact you're now classified as?
Casual plus.
So you're actually a close contact now.
Okay.
It's unclear if there are more contacts from Kmart Botany. The 1,200 that have come forward contacted the Ministry of Health directly. Kmart hasn't answered questions about how many customers visited the store during the exposure events or if it was working with the Ministry of Health to track them down. It's also unclear what happens to customers who visited on Sunday or those who bought click and collect orders. They don't fall into Ministry of Health contact categories, but the Unite Against COVID-19 social media page has advised some to isolate for 2 weeks. However, Auckland University Associate Professor Dr. Susie Wiles reckons the new categories are a good move, but the messaging needs to be more clear.
The thing that is a little confusing is, when you've got different people giving different advice, but, you can get human error happening all the time. I'm not surprised people are confused.
She suggests anyone unsure should get in touch with Healthline. Kmart's management team in Australia confirmed staff who worked with the recent case are isolating. The Ministry of Health says 8 out of 15 staff, now considered close plus contacts, have already returned negative tests. First Union Retail spokesperson Tali Williams says it's been frightening for those staff.
There is a lot of nervousness right now because people are still in that unknown, what does it mean for me? And we have communicated to the company some of the concerns coming from staff, such as what does the deep clean look like? What does it mean if I'm in the at-risk category? And we're just communicating with Kmart about those problems. And generally we're hearing back from them in a positive way.
As for the cluster's hotspot, Papatoetoe High School, the second series of tests in 2 weeks is well underway. Principal Vaughan Quio is feeling positive after a large number of students turned out for retesting in the first 24 hours, with negative results coming through quickly.
There are 185 people yet to return a test. That means they've yet to have one, or they've had one and the result hasn't been processed through yet and linked to our roll. which is a great number to get down to, given that we were starting with somewhere around 1,500.
Susie Wiles feels there's enough contact tracing, testing and isolation capacity to keep up with the latest cases and avoid any move up the alert levels. For Checkpoint, ko Katie Todd, CNA.
Right, to some of your feedback now. Now, Sally has been in touch and she sent us quite a long message, but it's an important one, so bear with me. She says, my neighbour was determined casual plus and told to isolate for 14 days with 3 tests required. Regardless, and despite initially being in alert level 3, the family of 4 continued its usual living and working. At the same time, starting a sizable construction with numerous workers on site day and night for almost 3 weeks now. Nobody was wearing masks or social distancing. Only after 12 days and having spoken to the neighbour and workers during level 2, I was told of their mandatory isolation. Healthline then advised I too would consequently have to comply with 14 days of self-isolating. Some people are selfish, Sally says. They know the rules, yet continue ignoring MOH advice. We are living on luck. Do keep your feedback coming. Text us on 2101. The government's pulled another lever to try to slow the runaway housing market, requiring the Reserve Bank to take house prices into account. National says the move's far too late, and a senior economist warns it'll have little short-term impact. But the government argues it's just another piece of the puzzle. Our political reporter Charlie Drever has the details.
House prices have been skyrocketing, making it harder to get a foot on the housing ladder. Attempting to fix the crisis late last year, the Finance Minister floated the idea that the Reserve Bank should consider its decisions' impact on housing. But the bank's governor, Adrian Orr, said it wasn't necessary and there could be adverse trade-offs. But Grant Robertson forged ahead and says today's changes make the government's expectations clear.
They now have to not only take into account the government's objectives around housing, but be very clear and transparent in how they've done that.
The Reserve Bank will keep its targets to maintain stability in consumer price inflation and contribute to maximum sustainable employment. The Minister also asked for advice on how the bank would use debt-to-income ratios and whether interest-only mortgages should be restricted. The Reserve Bank says today's decision is in line with its advice to the government, and Adrian Orr makes no apology for the bank's role in stimulating the economy to date. He told MPs in the hour before today's announcement was made, the central bank's already making moves to cool the housing market.
We're aware that at times we will be pushing pressure upwards or downwards, but remember we've got instruments beyond just the monetary policy. We also have financial stability, and we are watching very carefully. In fact, we acted very recently around constraining the borrowing capability of individuals by increasing the loan-to-value ratios, particularly for investors.
One of National's finance spokespeople, Andrew Bailey, says the minister should have made the changes months ago.
I think it's absolutely unfortunate that we've had a minister who's just basically sat around for some months. I mean, it was quite clear there was a path to do this.
Westpac chief economist Dominic Stevens doubts the new requirements will have any substantial effect.
The government has asked the Reserve Bank to assess the impact that its interest rate policies, its monetary policy, is having on the housing market. And look, having to assess it really isn't going to make a huge difference. So there'll be a small impact on how the Reserve Bank runs its financial policy and no real change to how it runs monetary policy.
Grant Robertson agrees it's not a silver bullet.
We have to be able to address both supply and demand. This is one aspect of our policy approach. There is much more to come.
Further measures to cool the market and possibly further boost supply are expected to be announced by Mr Robertson next month, after being delayed by the latest COVID outbreak. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Charlie Drever, DNA.
It's 16 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A review that found a charitable trust guilty of high costs and a lack of transparency has been labelled strange and ridiculous. The chair of the Christchurch Foundation made the comments as he faced a grilling from Christchurch City councillors today. Conan Young was there.
The Christchurch Foundation was set up in 2017 to attract donations for worthy causes in the city. To start, the council promised $600,000 a year to cover operating costs like wages for its 3 staff and CEO. Wanting to check it was getting good value for money, the council ordered a review by Deloitte. It found the foundation's costs were twice that of similar trusts. Today at a council meeting, the foundation's chair and Rich Lister, Humphrey Rolleston, described the council's brief to Deloitte as strange.
I personally answered every query that was raised under your brief, not mine, and we gave them full access to our auditors and our accountants. Full access. The only access we will not give them is confidential information that pertains to our commercial clients. It's none of Deloitte's business. There was no conclusion they could draw from it.
He told councillors Deloitte lacked the expertise to review the foundation, and he struggled to see why one was needed, given the small amount of money the trust spends each year.
I'd be really interested to know what this review has cost you. The interesting thing about this is it's really an audit over $150,000. That's the difference between salaries and wages, what we're spending. It's just ridiculous.
The foundation's chief executive, Amy Carter, told councillors Deloitte was wrong to strip out the $11 million it helped fundraise following the mosque attacks. She says the work she and former city councillor Raf Manji did in distributing this money was substantial and impacted on their ability to fundraise for other causes.
That swallowed us whole for a year and a half. When you talk to Raf and I, we will both tell you that's the hardest thing we have ever done professionally. It was thousands of hours. And the other unintentional consequence of this process is I've received phone calls over the last 2 days from members of that community that now think you don't care because you removed it out of that calculation. And that is devastating.
Council manager Linda Gibb was asked by councillors to explain how the $600,000 a year figure was reached, given the foundation failed to provide Deloitte or the council with a budget.
We haven't had that information because I believe we haven't had a robust enough conversation between our two parties as to why that information is needed.
The trust was quizzed about its reliance on the council grant to fund its operating costs. Amy Carter is confident it'll be self-funding within the next 2 years, but right now it's still reliant on ratepayer support.
If we had a significant cut in funding from the council for the new financial year, we'd have to very quickly move to find a fill or adjust our model. That's the reality.
The council agreed to put on hold a decision about future funding of the foundation until it could provide a draft budget for the next year and its 4-year plan on how it aims to stand on its own 2 feet. Kei o tō tahi ahau mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Konanyang tēnei.
Another COVID-19 vaccine's been deemed safe and effective by US regulators, and it's one on New Zealand's list. The Janssen vaccine could now be the 3rd approved for use in America. The government here has an in-principle agreement to buy 5 million doses of the vaccine, which also works against the South Africa variant of the virus. CNN's Alexandra Field has more.
A 3rd vaccine could be available to Americans as soon as next week.
If authorized, we are ready to roll out this vaccine without delay.
The Biden administration preparing to ship 3 to 4 million doses of Johnson & Johnson's single-dose vaccine, which is likely to receive emergency use authorization from the FDA later this week. The agency today releasing data showing Johnson & Johnson's vaccine is safe and more than 66% effective.
I think it'll get us to where we need to be in terms of having most of the public vaccinated, hopefully by the summer or early fall.
The federal government also unveiling a new plan to send out 25 million masks to people who need them most.
In the month of March, we will begin to deliver millions of masks to food banks and community health centers around the country. Many low-income Americans still lack affordable access to this basic protection.
This as weeks of declines in new COVID cases continue across the country, but not as steeply and not enough to eliminate concerns new variants could cause another surge.
We are in an arms race between the virus and our ability to vaccinate and shut down the avenues that it has to continue to evolve.
Weekly shipments of vaccines are getting another increase.
We've nearly doubled weekly supply of doses in just 5 weeks.
States are now set to receive a total of 14.5 million doses this week, with another 2.1 million doses going directly to pharmacies around the country. New analysis suggests that more nuanced allocation of vaccines targeting more specific vulnerable groups could help states save thousands of lives.
Sort of the disproportionate toll of the pandemic on Black Americans, as well as the effects of structural racism, call for Black Americans to have a lower vaccine cutoff, because often we are getting underlying conditions at much earlier ages than our white American counterparts.
And tonight, even more evidence that the pain felt from COVID in so many ways is still far from behind us. Studies show that up to 30% of people experience long-haul COVID symptoms. Dr. Anthony Fauci announcing a new national study will look at causes and treatments.
What does the spectrum of recovery from this infection look like across all the entire population? Young individuals, middle-aged, elderly. How many people continue to have symptoms of COVID-19, or even, as we've seen, develop new symptoms that they did not have even as part of their acute infection?
And that was Dr. Anthony Fauci ending that report by Alexandra Field. Days into Australia's rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine, health authorities are having to reassure people the program is in safe hands. Yesterday it emerged 2 Queensland aged care residents were given the wrong dose of the Pfizer vaccine. Australia's Department of Health is threatening to tear up contracts with the company which employed the doctor, while there are questions about the training doctors are receiving. Tom Lowry has more.
It's a terrible mistake at the worst possible time.
It's disappointing and frustrating that this has happened.
Health authorities are scrambling to reassure the public the vaccine rollout is in good hands, after evidence turned up yesterday that maybe it's not. 2 aged care residents are being monitored in a Queensland hospital after they were given 4 times the recommended dose of the Pfizer vaccine. Dr. Chris Moy is the Vice President of the Australian Medical Association.
People should understand that. Isn't it good that we have health systems that picked it up early and is now admitting it, but also making sure that it doesn't happen again?
Not only did the doctor involved bungle the 2 vaccinations, it was later revealed the clinician had not completed mandatory online training for anyone involved in the rollout. The doctor will be referred to the medical regulator. And the Department of Health is threatening to tear up a major contract with Healthcare Australia, which employed the doctor, if there are further mishaps. It's one of just 4 companies contracted to provide doctors, nurses and other healthcare workers to help with the national rollout.
Greg Hunt has to assure Australians, if he's using these private providers, that every single worker is properly qualified and has completed the relevant training.
Labor's health spokesman, Mark Butler, says he's worried this incident will cause alarm.
Well, there's a real risk that it will hit public confidence, and I want to make sure that Greg Hunt takes whatever action is necessary to get things back on track.
The protocols are there that everyone had to be trained and skilled, but somehow one person slipped through.
Nationals MP Dr David Gillespie is part of a cross-party group of doctors in Parliament working to build confidence in the vaccine rollout. He admits the incident is a blow, but says no one should be alarmed.
These 2 individual people have had a slightly sore arm because they had a bigger dose. But please be reassured, we have got 2 great vaccines that are coming through, and they all go through extensive testing. So they wouldn't be being used if they hadn't met the standards that the Therapeutic Goods Administration sets.
Dr Chris Moy from the AMA says the key to restoring confidence is making sure training is actually being completed.
We need to make sure that everybody understands they have to do the training. It's a mandatory requirement. And also that any organisation that employs anybody to do it also ensures individuals that administer the vaccine have had the training.
And that report was by the ABC's Tom Lowry. Police in Los Angeles won't pursue charges against Tiger Woods, saying the car crash that caused him devastating injuries was an accident. The golfer's recovering in hospital after extensive surgery to multiple breaks in his lower leg. Police say it's a miracle he survived. The ABC's Greg Jennett reports.
Helicopter rotors above and a tow truck out in front. The curious crowded the shoulders of Hawthorne Boulevard near Ranchos Palos Verdes in LA. Crashes are common in the coastal estate, but this one's generated a fascination like no other.
Coming down the hill, you'll touch
speeds of about 40, 50 very quickly.
Sudhir Patel passed by minutes after the single vehicle rollover of Tiger Woods' Genesis SUV, but he stuck around to check out the recovery of the wreck.
Unfortunately, I didn't get to see Tiger's car come round here, thank God, and I hope to God he's doing well, really.
At Harbour UCLA Medical Centre, the 45-year-old golf pro's undergone operations. Bone had penetrated the skin on his right leg below the knee. Doctors cut muscle away and applied pins and screws, some just below the knee, others down near the ankle and foot. The Tiger Woods Foundation's described the surgery as long, but he's said to be awake, responsive and recovering in his room now.
From what we know, just from a tibia and a fibular fracture with a rotting, generally the recovery from that should be very good.
Atlanta-based orthopaedic surgeon Scott Bowden is speculating, but bringing a doctor's perspective to the question everyone who's followed Woods' remarkable career is asking. Does he still have a PGA tournament left in him?
For an elite athlete like Tiger, he's got as good a chance from coming back from this as anybody does.
There are plenty of admirers willing the 82-time tour winner on. Donald Trump has, and Barack Obama's tweeted, if we've learnt anything over the years, it's to never count Tiger out. When he's not playing basketball, NBA champ Steph Curry's a keen golfer and a Woods friend.
It's not about golf, it's about his quality of life and being there for his kids, and that's the most important thing right now. So hopefully he makes a full recovery to be there for them, because he got a lot of life to live.
A crash investigation will examine any onboard data, but excessive speed's already been nominated as a factor by sheriffs, including Deputy Carlos Gonzalez, who attended the accident in a 45-mile-per-hour zone, or about 70 kilometres an hour.
When I'm doing speed enforcement, I will sometimes catch people going 80-plus miles per hour. People see a nice stretch of road and maybe they're not watching their speedometer, or maybe they're in a hurry.
Tiger Woods was a man in a hurry, figuratively anyway. He was heading to a nearby course to make a TV show, but he hadn't been driving golf balls in his famously long and accurate fashion for weeks. He was in a race to recover from yet another round of back surgery. The idea had been to make the US Masters in April. Woods is already the second oldest player to win the prestigious tournament, and that was 2 years ago.
The return to glory.
Lying in his LA hospital bed, the greater doubt now is not whether he'll play again at Augusta, but whether the glory days of a touring pro are over altogether.
Now, before we go, on the financial constraints preventing Checkpoint from having graphics for the weather, this listener says, if my friend can perform a mime for her final architecture degree presentation about utilising internal spaces in front of reps of major firms, then maybe the weather can be done that way too. And Gustavo on Twitter is also supportive. He says interpretive dancing for the weather would be awesome. Well, better go work on my moves for thunder and lightning. It is going to be epic. Susanna. We will be back tomorrow, same time, same place.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A potential coronavirus contact waits nearly 8 hours.